The bullet shattered the window of the general store just as Katherine was reaching for a bolt of calico. And instead of screaming like any sensible woman might have done, she grabbed the fabric, tucked it under her arm, and marched straight to the counter to pay for it. The shopkeeper, old Mr. Henderson, was already flat on his belly behind the register, but Emma stood there calmly, counting out her coins while gunfire erupted in the street outside. That was the moment Tobias Carson first saw her through the dusty window of the Agua Caliente saloon, and he thought to himself that either that woman had no sense at all, or she had more backbone than half the men in this New Mexico Territory town. It was late spring in 1878, and Agua Caliente was the kind of place where trouble rode in on a hot wind and stayed a while. The town had grown up around the natural hot springs that gave it its name, nestled in the northern part of the territory where the mountains met the high desert. Tobias had come down from those mountains 3 days prior, his pack horse loaded with furs, and his saddlebags heavy with the loneliness that came from spending 6 months in the high country, with nothing but pine trees and silence for company. He was a big man, the kind of big that made doorways seem narrower and ceilings lower. His shoulders stretched the seams of his buckskin shirt, and his arms were corded with muscle from swinging an axe and hauling traps through snow that could swallow a man whole. His hair hung past his shoulders, dark brown and tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite his months in the wilderness. At 28, he had the kind of face that women noticed and men respected, all hard angles and steady eyes the color of creek water. The shooting outside continued, and Tobias moved to the saloon window for a better look. 2 drifters were trading shots with the sheriff and his deputy, some dispute over a card game that had turned deadly as these things often did. But what held his attention was the young woman who had finished paying for her fabric and was now walking out of the general store, stepping carefully around the wooden boardwalk, as if the bullets singing through the air were nothing more than mosquitoes at a summer picnic. She was maybe 22 or 23, with auburn hair pinned up in a sensible bun that was already coming loose in the commotion. Her dress was plain brown cotton, mended in places but clean and well kept. She was not what men in those parts would call a classic beauty, but there was something in the set of her jaw and the directness of her gaze that caught and held attention. She walked with purpose, that bolt of calico still tucked under her arm, heading straight down the street toward a small house at the far end of town. One of the drifters swung his gun in her direction. Whether by accident or design Tobias could not say, but he was moving before his mind caught up with his body. He hit the saloon doors hard enough to send them banging against the outside walls and crossed the dusty street in 4 long strides. His hand caught Emma's elbow just as the shot rang out, and he pulled her against the wall of the nearest building, his body shielding hers as splinters exploded from the wooden post where her head had been a moment before. She looked up at him with eyes the color of honey, and instead of thanking him, she said, "You are standing on my fabric." Tobias glanced down. Sure enough, the calico had fallen in the dust and his boot had come down right on top of it. He stepped back quickly and she bent to retrieve it, shaking it out with sharp, efficient movements while bullets continued to fly around them. "You might want to stay down," he suggested, his voice a low rumble. "I might," she agreed, "but I need to get home. My father is expecting this fabric. I promised I would have it back by noon." "Your father can wait 5 minutes for the shooting to stop." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his size and his mountain man clothing and the way he had positioned himself between her and the danger in the street. "Are you new to Agua Caliente, mister?" "Been here 3 days. Name is Tobias Carson." "Katherine," she said, and did not offer her hand because both of hers were occupied with the fabric. "And I appreciate you trying to help, Mr. Carson, but I truly do need to get home." The shooting had stopped. The sheriff and his deputy had the two drifters face down in the dirt, and people were beginning to emerge from buildings like prairie dogs after a storm. Tobias stepped back to give Emma room, and she nodded her thanks before continuing on her way, her back straight and her steps unhurried. The bartender, a weathered man named Charlie who had seen everything twice, was leaning in the saloon doorway when Tobias returned. "That is Emma Katherine," he said, as if the name explained everything. "Runs the boarding house with her father since her mother passed 2 years back. Folks say she is too stubborn for her own good. Had 3 men try to court her and she sent them all packing." "Why is that?" Tobias asked, though he was not sure why he cared. Charlie shrugged. "Says she will not marry a man just because it is expected. Says she will choose her own path. Her father does not push her, which some folks think is part of the problem. They say he raised her too independent, let her read too many books, gave her ideas above her station." Tobias thought about the way she had stood in that store, calmly conducting her business while chaos reigned outside. He thought about the set of her jaw and the steadiness in her eyes. "Maybe stubborn just means she knows her own mind well," Charlie laughed. "You might be the first man in this town to see it that way. Most think she needs a firm hand to settle her down." "Most men are fools," Tobias said, and went back to his whiskey. But over the next week, he found his thoughts returning to Emma Katherine more often than was comfortable. He sold his furs and restocked his supplies, and he should have been heading back to the mountains, but something kept him in Agua Caliente. He told himself it was because his pack horse had thrown a shoe and needed time to recover. He told himself it was because the saloon had a good poker game going. He told himself a lot of things that were not quite true. The truth made itself clear on a Tuesday afternoon when he found himself walking past the boarding house for the 3rd time that day. It was a neat, 2-story building with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows. A hand-painted sign read, "Katherine House Clean Rooms, Fair Prices." Emma was on the porch, beating a rug with more force than seemed strictly necessary, and she looked up as he passed. "Mr. Carson," she said, pausing in her work, "you seem to walk past here quite often." He stopped, caught. "I was just heading to the livery." "The livery is in the other direction." Then I was heading away from the livery. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, the first he had seen from her. "That is a more honest answer. Would you like some water?" "It is hot today, and you look like you have been doing a lot of walking in circles." He should have declined. He should have tipped his hat and moved on. Instead, he climbed the porch steps and accepted the tin cup she brought him from inside. The water was cool and sweet, probably from the springs. "You are a trapper," she said, leaning against the porch railing. "It was not a question. I am. Spent the winter up in the mountains north of here. Good beaver country, some marten." "That sounds lonely. It can be. But it has its own peace. No one telling you what to think or how to be." She studied him with those honey-colored eyes. "I imagine that appeals to you." "It does. Does the same appeal to you? What makes you think that?" "The shopkeeper told me about the men who tried to court you, about how you sent them away." Her expression cooled slightly. "And I suppose he told you I was too stubborn for my own good." "He did. I told him stubborn probably meant you knew your own mind well." The coolness left her face, replaced by surprise and something that might have been pleasure. "That is an unusual opinion, Mr. Carson." "Tobias. And I have found that what most people call stubborn in a woman, they would call determined in a man." She laughed then, a genuine sound that made something warm unfold in his chest. "You are not like most of the men in this town, are you?" "I spend most of my time with beaver and pine trees." That might make me odd by town standards. I think it might make you sensible. They talked on that porch for an hour, and then another. Emma told him about running the boarding house, about the challenges of keeping a business going in a town where most people thought a woman should be married and tending her own home rather than managing property. She told him about her mother, who had been a schoolteacher before marrying Emma's father, and who had made sure Emma learned to read and write and cipher as well as any boy. Tobias told her about his life in the mountains, about the harsh beauty of winter storms and the satisfaction of living by his own skill and strength. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about how his father had been a farmer who died when Tobias was 16, leaving him to provide for his mother and 2 sisters. He had worked as a logger and a freight hauler, and a dozen other hard jobs before his mother remarried and his sisters found husbands, and by then he had developed a taste for independence that no town could satisfy. "You ever get lonely up there?" Emma asked as the sun began to slant toward evening. "Yes," he admitted, "but I thought that was the price of freedom. Maybe it does not have to be." He looked at her, at the way the golden light caught in her hair and made her eyes luminescent. "What do you mean?" "I mean that perhaps there is a difference between being alone and being free. One is isolation, the other is choice. And do you feel free or alone?" "Both," she said quietly. "I have chosen my path, but it is not an easy one. This town has opinions about what a woman should be, and I do not fit their mold. My father supports me, but I see how it weighs on him, the gossip and the judgment. Sometimes I wonder if I am being brave or just difficult." "You are being yourself. That is the bravest thing anyone can do." She met his eyes and something passed between them, a recognition that went deeper than words. "Would you like to stay for supper, Tobias? We serve meals to our boarders and there is always extra. My father would like to meet you." He should have said no. He should have walked away before whatever was growing between them put down roots too deep to tear out. But he said yes instead, and followed her into the boarding house that smelled of beeswax and fresh bread. Emma's father, Edward Katherine, was a tall, thin man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers from his work as the town's newspaper editor and printer. He shook Tobias's hand with a firm grip and welcomed him to the table without any of the suspicion or hostility a father might show to a strange man interested in his daughter. The boarding house had 4 other guests that evening: a traveling salesman, a widow heading west to live with her daughter, and 2 miners who were working a claim in the nearby hills. The conversation around the table was lively, and Tobias watched Emma move through it all with easy competence, serving food and keeping coffee cups filled and managing 6 different conversations at once. After the meal, Edward invited Tobias to sit with him on the porch while Emma and the widow cleared the table. The older man packed a pipe with tobacco and lit it, sending sweet smoke into the evening air. "My daughter speaks highly of you," Edward said. "That is unusual. She does not speak highly of many men in this town. She is an unusual woman. That she is. Her mother was the same way, too smart and too independent for most people's comfort. I fell in love with her the first time I saw her because she was arguing with the mayor about funding for the school, and she was winning. Took me 6 months to convince her to marry me. What changed her mind? I asked her what she wanted from life, and then I listened to the answer. Most men tell a woman what she should want. I let Sarah tell me, and then I figured out how we could build that life together." He drew on his pipe. "Emma is the same way. She knows what she wants and she will not settle for less just because it would be easier." "What does she want?" "You should ask her that yourself. But I will tell you this. If you are interested in my daughter, and I think you might be, then you should know she will not be content as just a wife. She will want to be a partner, an equal. She will want her opinions heard and her choices respected. Many men cannot give that. I am not many men. Edward smiled. No, I do not think you are, but words are easy, Tobias. Living up to them is harder. I have spent most of my adult life alone because I have not found anyone worth changing that for. But Emma makes me think that maybe I was not looking in the right places. Mountain men usually do not look in towns at all. No, Tobias agreed. We usually do not. Over the following weeks, Tobias found reasons to stay in Agua Caliente. He took a room at the boarding house, telling himself it was more comfortable than the rooms above the saloon. He helped Edward repair a section of the porch that had rotted through. He built Emma a new clothes line when the old one collapsed. He was there, steady and solid, not pushing but not disappearing either. Emma watched him with cautious eyes at first, waiting for him to reveal himself as another man who wanted to change her or own her. But Tobias did neither. When she expressed an opinion, he listened and often asked follow-up questions. When she made a decision about the boarding house, he supported it even when he might have chosen differently. When the saloon owner made a crude comment about women who ran their own businesses, Tobias had a quiet word with him that left the man pale and apologetic. One evening after the boarders had retired and Edward had gone to set type for the next day's newspaper, Emma and Tobias sat on the porch in the comfortable silence that had developed between them. "Why are you still here?" Emma asked finally. "Your horse is healed. You have your supplies." Mountain men do not usually stay in town this long. "I found something here worth staying for. The poker games," he smiled. "Not the poker games." "Then what?" "You know what, Emma?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I have had men court me before, Tobias. They were all very proper and polite. They brought me flowers and complimented my cooking and told me I was pretty. And then, once they thought I was interested, they started trying to shape me into what they wanted, suggesting I should not help my father so much with the newspaper, hinting that I should let them handle the business decisions, telling me that once we were married, I would not need to worry about such things anymore. I am not interested in changing you. Every man says that at first. Then let me prove it. Ask me anything. Tell me your dreams for the future, the ones you think would send a man running." She looked at him, searching his face for signs of mockery or insincerity. Finding none, she took a breath. "I want to expand the boarding house. There is land adjacent to this property that is for sale, and I have been saving money to buy it. I want to build another building, bigger than this one, with room for twice as many guests. Agua Caliente is growing. The railroad is talking about putting in a spur line. This town could become something significant, and I want to be part of that growth." That sounds like a solid business plan. Most men hear me talk about business and tell me I should be thinking about babies and households instead. Most men are intimidated by a woman with ambition. What else? I want to keep helping my father with the newspaper. I write some of the articles, though he publishes them under his name because people would not take them seriously if they knew a woman wrote them. But I want to write, Tobias. I want to tell stories about real people and real things happening in this territory. Then you should write under your own name. And when I am married, when I have children, then you will write and have children. Women do both all the time. They are just not given credit for it. Emma felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. You make it sound simple. The doing will not be simple, but the principle is. You are talented and smart and capable. Getting married should not require you to become less of who you are. Is that a proposal, Mr. Carson? He turned to face her fully, his eyes serious. Not yet. We have only known each other a few weeks, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable, Emma. I want you to know that when I do ask you to marry me, it will be because I want you as my partner, not my subordinate. It will be because I want to build a life with you, not have you fit into a life I've already built. And your life in the mountains. I have been thinking about that. I could trap in the winter, come back to town in the spring, or I could find other work. I am good with my hands. I can build or hunt or do freight hauling. There are options. I do not want you to give up what you love. Emma, I have loved the mountains because they were the only place I felt free to be myself. But if I can have that freedom with you, then the mountains are just geography. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers small in his calloused palm. I think I could love you, Tobias Carson. That terrifies me. Why does it terrify you? Because loving someone gives them power to hurt you, to disappoint you, to try to change you. That is true. But loving someone also gives them the power to support you, to believe in you, to help you become even more yourself. He squeezed her hand gently. I am terrified too, if that helps. I have built my whole life around not needing anyone, but I find I need you, Emma Katherine. I need your strength and your certainty and your stubborn insistence on being exactly who you are. She smiled, and in that smile was the beginning of trust. Then I suppose we should see where this terrifying thing leads us. They courted properly after that, by the standards of the day, but with an honesty that was rare. They walked together through town, and Tobias endured the stares and whispers of people who wondered what a mountain man wanted with Emma Katherine. They attended a barn dance at a neighboring ranch, and Tobias moved with surprising grace for such a large man, spinning Emma around the floor while she laughed with pure joy. He met her friends, the few she had in a town that mostly did not understand her. There was Doc Pemberton's wife, Ruth, who ran the town's tiny lending library out of her front parlor. There was the blacksmith's daughter, Clara, who was learning her father's trade despite considerable opposition. There was the schoolteacher, Miss Sarah Wright, who had been Emma's mother's protégée and shared her progressive ideas about women's education. These women welcomed Tobias into their circle after testing him with sharp questions and sharper observations, and when he passed their scrutiny, they gave Emma their blessing. He is different from the others, Ruth said one afternoon when the women gathered at the boarding house for tea. Emma was in the kitchen preparing food, but she could hear them through the open door. He looks at her like she is something precious, Clara added, but not precious like a china doll, precious like a good knife or a solid horse, something valuable because it is useful and strong. I am not sure that is the most romantic comparison, Miss Wright said dryly, but I take your meaning. He respects her. That is rarer than it should be. Emma carried the tea tray into the parlor, her cheeks warm. You all know I can hear you. Good, Ruth said. Then you can hear us say that if you do not marry that man, you are a fool. And we know you are not a fool, Emma Katherine. But the path to happiness was not without obstacles. In a town the size of Agua Caliente, everyone had opinions and many were not shy about sharing them. The mayor's wife stopped Emma on the street one day to express her concern about Emma's association with that rough mountain man. He is not civilized, dear, the woman said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. A man like that, he has lived too long without proper society. Who knows what kind of husband he would make? Why, he might take you up into those mountains and you would never be seen again. Emma smiled politely. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Whitmore, but Tobias is one of the most civilized men I know, if by civilized you mean decent and respectful. If you mean he knows which fork to use at a fancy dinner, well, I do not own fancy forks, so I suppose it does not matter. There was also Jack Morrison, one of the men who had previously courted Emma and been rejected. He was the son of the town's largest landowner, used to getting what he wanted, and he did not take kindly to seeing Emma with Tobias. He made a point of offering false sympathy to Tobias one day outside the saloon. I tried to court Miss Katherine myself last year, Jack said, loud enough for the men around them to hear. Fine-looking woman, but too headstrong for a proper marriage. You will have your hands full trying to manage her, Carson. Tobias looked at him with level eyes. I have no intention of managing her. She is a person, not a business. Well, a wife needs guidance, needs a man to make the important decisions. Surely you can see that. What I see is a woman perfectly capable of making her own decisions. What I see is a man who could not handle being with someone smarter than him. Jack's face flushed red. You calling me stupid, mountain man? I am calling you small-minded. There is a difference, though not much of one. For a moment, it looked like Jack might take a swing at him, but Tobias did not move, did not tense, just stood there with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly how capable he was. Jack backed down, muttering insults under his breath as he walked away. The sheriff, Tom Daly, had watched the exchange from across the street. He crossed over to where Tobias stood. You made an enemy there. I've had worse enemies than a spoiled rancher's son. Maybe so, but be careful. The Morrisons have influence in this town. They can make things difficult. Let them try. I am not going anywhere. But the Morrisons did try to make things difficult. They spread rumors about Tobias, suggesting he was wanted for crimes in other territories, that he had an Indian wife up in the mountains, that he was only after Emma's money. The rumors were baseless and easily disproved, but they stung nonetheless. Emma confronted the situation head-on, writing a sharply worded article for her father's newspaper about the nature of gossip and the damage it caused to good people's reputations. She did not name names, but everyone in town knew who she was talking about. Edward published it under her name for the first time, and the town buzzed with scandal. The mayor came to the boarding house, blustering about propriety and a woman's place. Edward met him at the door. My daughter wrote that article because she has a talent for words and a passion for truth, Edward said calmly. If you have a problem with what she wrote, you can take it up with the territorial courts. We have freedom of the press in this country, last I checked. But a woman writing for a newspaper is no different from a woman teaching school or running a business. Unless you would like to explain why it should be different. The mayor left unsatisfied, but there was nothing he could do. The article stood, and slowly, the rumors began to die down. Some people even began to see Emma in a new light, as a woman with courage and conviction rather than just stubbornness. Through it all, Tobias was a steady presence. He did not fight Emma's battles for her, but he stood beside her, ready to support whatever actions she chose to take. When she was angry, he listened. When she was hurt, he offered comfort without trying to fix everything. When she doubted herself, he reminded her of her strength without dismissing her fears. Summer deepened into the intense heat of July. The mountains north of Agua Caliente beckoned, and Tobias grew restless in the way of men used to open spaces. Emma saw it in the way he would stare at the peaks visible from the porch, in the way his hands would still when he was working, as if he were listening for something only he could hear. "You miss it," she said one evening. "I do," he admitted. "It is part of me, Emma, that wildness. I am not sure I can fully leave it behind." "Then do not. Take me with you." He looked at her in surprise. "Up into the mountains? Why not? You said you want to show me your world. Show me." "It is not an easy trip, and we are not married. People would talk. People already talk." "And we will be married soon enough, will we not?" He smiled slowly. "Are you proposing to me, Emma Katherine? I am suggesting that perhaps we stop waiting for the perfect moment and start making our moments perfect. But if you need a formal proposal, then yes. Marry me, Tobias Carson." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close enough that she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "Yes, Yes, I will marry you. I will marry you tomorrow if you will have me. Next week, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. My father will need time to arrange things. And I need time to make a dress. They were married the following Saturday in the small church at the center of town. Emma wore a dress she had sewn herself from fine blue cotton, simple but beautiful, and she had flowers from Ruth's garden in her hair. Tobias wore new clothes purchased from the general store, though he still looked like what he was, a man more comfortable in buckskin and open sky. The church was full, because everyone in Agua Caliente wanted to witness the wedding of the stubborn girl and the mountain man. Some came out of genuine affection. Others came out of curiosity. A few came hoping to see the marriage fail to materialize, though they were disappointed. Edward walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Your mother would be so proud of you, he whispered. You found a man worthy of you. The ceremony was simple, conducted by the Methodist circuit preacher who passed through Agua Caliente once a month. When it came time for the vows, Tobias spoke in his deep, steady voice. I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you. I promise to listen when you speak and trust in your judgment. I promise to build a life with you, not for you. I promise to love you as you are, not as someone else thinks you should be. Emma's voice was clear and strong. I promise to honor your wildness and your need for open spaces. I promise to be your partner in all things, in hardship and in joy. I promise to trust you with my heart even though that terrifies me. I promise to love you with everything I am. When the preacher pronounced them married, Tobias kissed his wife with a tenderness that made more than one woman in the congregation sigh. And Emma kissed him back with a passion that raised a few eyebrows but made her friends smile. The celebration afterward was held in the boarding house dining room, with food prepared by Emma and her friends and music provided by a fiddle player from the saloon. They danced and ate and accepted congratulations from the townspeople. And when Jack Morrison appeared to offer stiff, formal congratulations, Tobias shook his hand with graciousness, and Emma thanked him with sincerity that shamed the young man's earlier behavior. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Tobias and Emma slipped away to the room they would now share. Edward had diplomatically decided to visit a friend in a neighboring town for a few days, giving the newlyweds privacy. Emma stood by the window, looking out at the mountains barely visible in the gathering darkness. Tobias came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. No regrets, he asked softly. None. You, not a single one. She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. I love you, Tobias. I do not think I knew what that meant until I met you. I love you too. You have changed everything for me, Emma. You have made me want things I thought I could never have. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that went beyond the physical. They talked long into the night, making plans and sharing dreams, building together the foundation of the life they would share. 2 weeks later, they set out for the mountains. Emma had arranged for Clara to help Edward with the boarding house while she was gone, and she packed supplies for a month-long trip with the efficiency of someone who had been managing logistics for years. The journey into the high country was challenging but beautiful. They followed trails that Tobias knew by heart, climbing steadily into pine forests that smelled of resin and earth. Emma rode well, having learned as a child, and she adapted to the physical demands of mountain travel with the same determination she brought to everything else. Tobias watched her with pride and growing admiration. When they had to ford a cold, fast-moving stream, she did not hesitate or complain. When they encountered a black bear on the trail, she stayed calm while he guided their horses in a wide circle around it. When they made camp at night, she helped gather firewood and prepare food, learning the rhythms of wilderness living. "You are a natural at this," he said one evening as they sat by their fire, the stars impossibly bright overhead. "I like it," she said, and he could hear the surprise in her voice. "I thought I might feel frightened or out of place, but I feel free. Is this what it is like for you up here?" "Yes, but it is better with you here. I never knew how lonely I was until I had someone to share it with." They spent their days exploring the high meadows where Tobias set his trap lines, fishing in crystal-clear lakes, and simply existing in the vast quiet of the wilderness. Emma wrote in a journal she had brought, documenting their journey and her thoughts. At night, they made love under blankets and stars, their connection deepening with each passing day. "I understand now why you love this," Emma said one afternoon as they sat beside a waterfall, eating lunch. "It is not about being away from people. It is about being close to something essential. Something real." "That is exactly it," Tobias said. "In town, everything is complicated, politics and money and other people's opinions. Up here, life is simple. Eat, stay warm, stay alive. There is a purity to it. But you cannot live up here forever, not if you want to be with me. I know. And I have been thinking about that. I can trap in the winter, like I said. But the rest of the year, we can build our life in Agua Caliente. You can expand the boarding house. I can find work. We can be together." "What if we could find a way to have both?" Emma said slowly. "What if we built a place up here? Not to live in year-round, but as a retreat. Somewhere we could come when we need to remember this feeling. A cabin, on your trap line. We could spend part of every year here, just the two of us. And the rest of the time we could be in town, building our business and our life there." Tobias considered this, his eyes on the waterfall. "It would be a lot of work, building a cabin up here, maintaining two places. We are both used to hard work, and we would be doing it together." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Then that is what we will do. We will build a life that has room for both your dreams and mine." They returned to Agua Caliente in late August, tanned and strong and more deeply in love than when they had left. Edward welcomed them back with relief and delight, and the boarding house felt like home in a way it never had before, because now it was truly Emma's home to share with her husband. True to their plans, they began working toward their goals. Emma used her savings to purchase the adjacent land, and Tobias drew up plans for a new building that would double their capacity. They hired workers from town, and Tobias worked alongside them, his strength and skill with construction proving invaluable. The work was hard and the days were long, but they thrived on it. Emma managed the existing boarding house and oversaw the business aspects of the expansion while Tobias handled the physical labor of building. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, exhausted but satisfied, and talk about the future. The new building was completed by late autumn, a sturdy 2-story structure with 12 guest rooms, a large dining hall, and modern amenities that made it one of the finest lodging options in that part of New Mexico territory. They named it the Carson House, and it opened to immediate success. The railroad spur line that had been rumored became reality, bringing more travelers through Agua Caliente, and Emma's business sense proved as sharp as Tobias had known it would be. She also continued to write for the newspaper, her articles now published under her own name and gaining recognition beyond their small town. She wrote about life in the territory, about the challenges and opportunities facing settlers, about the changing role of women in the West. Her words were thoughtful and provocative, and they attracted both praise and criticism, but Emma had learned to value her own opinion over the world's. Tobias kept his word about trapping, heading into the mountains for 3 months that winter while Emma managed the boarding houses with help from Clara and Edward. It was hard being apart, but they both knew the separation was temporary, and the reunion in early spring was sweet. "I hated every moment without you," Tobias admitted as he held her in their room, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I counted the days," Emma said, "but I was also proud of us, proud that we can have our own pursuits and still come back together. Next winter, we go together. We will stay at the cabin I started building on the trap line. You started building without me. I wanted it to be a surprise. It is not finished yet. We will need to work on it together next summer, but the frame is up and the roof is on. It will be a good place, Emma, our place." And so they fell into a rhythm. Spring, summer, and autumn in Agua Caliente, managing their growing business empire and contributing to the community. Winter in the mountains, in the cabin they built together over several years, trapping and writing and existing in the wild spaces they both had come to love. Emma discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1881, 3 years after their marriage. She told Tobias while they were working in the garden behind the boarding house, and he swept her up in his arms with such joy that she laughed until she cried. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though she could see the answer in his face. Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, too. "What if I am not a good father? You will be an excellent father. You are patient and kind and strong. Those are the things a child needs." Their son was born in late autumn, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's honey-colored eyes. They named him Thomas Edward Carson, after both his grandfathers, and he was welcomed into the world by a community that had grown to respect and admire his parents. Tobias was indeed an excellent father, involved and attentive in ways that were unusual for the time. He changed diapers and walked the floor with a colicky baby and sang soft mountain ballads to lull Thomas to sleep. He made no distinction between men's work and women's work when it came to raising their son, and Emma loved him all the more for it. Edward was a devoted grandfather, spoiling the baby shamelessly and publishing a somewhat embarrassing announcement in the newspaper about the arrival of his grandson. Ruth, Clara, and Miss Wright became honorary aunts, showing up with gifts and advice and offers to watch Thomas whenever Emma and Tobias needed time alone. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Emma and Tobias included him in their life in the mountains. They built a small addition onto the cabin for his room, and he learned to love the wilderness as his father did. By the age of 4, he could identify animal tracks and knew which berries were safe to eat. He was a bright, curious child, fearless in the way children who feel deeply secure can be. In 1885, Emma gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Rose, after Emma's mother and the wild roses that grew around their mountain cabin. Sarah was as different from Thomas as 2 children could be, quiet and thoughtful where he was energetic and outgoing, but she had the same honey-colored eyes and the same stubborn determination that had defined her mother. The boarding houses continued to prosper. Agua Caliente grew into a proper town with the coming of the railroad, and the Carson house became known throughout the territory as the best lodging available. Emma's reputation as a businesswoman grew as well, and she was often consulted by other women looking to start their own enterprises. She also became involved in the movement for women's suffrage, writing impassioned articles about women's right to vote and attending meetings when organizers came through the territory. Tobias supported her fully, even when it made them unpopular with some of the more conservative elements in town. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked him one evening after a particularly contentious town meeting where she had argued for women's voting rights. "Marrying a woman who causes so much controversy." "Never," he said firmly. I married you because you are brave enough to stand up for what you believe in. I would worry if you stopped." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas grew into a tall, strong young man who loved the mountains as his father did, and had his mother's sharp mind and independent spirit. Sarah became a voracious reader and talented writer, her articles appearing alongside her mother's in the newspaper by the time she was 16. Edward passed away peacefully in 1892, surrounded by family, his last words expressing pride in the life his daughter had built. His death was mourned by the entire community, and the newspaper that had been his life's work was taken over by Emma, with Sarah as her assistant editor. Tobias never did give up trapping entirely, though as he aged, he spent less time in the high country and more time helping Emma with the business and teaching his skills to Thomas. The two of them would disappear into the mountains for weeks at a time, returning with furs and stories and a deeper bond. The cabin in the mountains remained their refuge, the place they went to reconnect with each other, and with the wild spaces that had brought them together. They would leave the children with Clara or Ruth and spend a week or two alone, remembering what it felt like to be just Emma and Tobias, not parents or business owners or community leaders. "You remember the day we met?" Emma asked him once, as they sat on the porch of the mountain cabin watching the sun set over the peaks. They were both in their 50s now, their hair showing gray, their bodies carrying the marks of lives fully lived. "You were buying fabric while people shot at each other in the street. I thought you were either crazy or the bravest person I had ever seen." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But I had promised my father I would get that fabric, and I was too stubborn to let gunfire stop me." "Stubborn," Tobias said, pulling her close. "That was the word everyone used about you." "But I knew better. Stubborn just meant you knew your own mind well. You saw me," Emma said softly. "Really saw me when everyone else just saw a difficult woman who would not conform. I saw the woman I wanted to spend my life with, and I have never regretted that vision for a single moment." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Below them, somewhere in the valley, Agua Caliente would be settling in for the night. The boarding houses would be full of travelers. The newspaper would be ready for tomorrow's printing. Their children would be pursuing their own dreams. But up here, in this place they had built together, it was just the two of them and the wilderness and the love that had sustained them through everything. "I want to grow old with you here," Emma said. "Well, older than we already are. I want to sit on this porch when we are 70 and 80 and remember everything we have built together." "Then, that is what we will do," Tobias promised. "We will come here every year as long as we are able. We will watch the seasons change and the world evolve, but this place will remain ours. Our sanctuary, our reminder of who we are when everything else is stripped away." "I love you," Emma said. "I have loved you since that first conversation on the boarding house porch when you told me stubborn meant knowing my own mind. You gave me the greatest gift anyone can give another person." "What gift is that?" "Permission to be myself. You never tried to change me or diminish me. You just loved me as I was and helped me become even more myself." "That is what love should be," Tobias said. "Not possession but partnership, not ownership but support. You taught me that, Emma. Before you, I thought freedom meant being alone. You showed me it meant being fully known and fully accepted." They went inside as the night grew cold, building a fire in the stone fireplace Tobias had constructed with his own hands. They made love with the tenderness and deep knowing of long partnership, and afterward they lay tangled together, listening to the wind in the pines outside. "Tell me a story," Emma said, as she often did on these mountain nights. "What kind of story?" "Tell me about the stubborn girl and the mountain man. Tell me how they found each other against all odds and built a life that was more than either of them could have imagined alone. So Tobias told her their story, embellishing the details and making her laugh with his descriptions. He told her about the moment he first saw her, calmly buying fabric while bullets flew. He told her about falling in love with her courage and her fierce independence. He told her about the challenges they had faced and overcome together, about the children they had raised and the businesses they had built and the love that had sustained them through it all. "And they lived happily ever after," Emma said when he finished, her eyes drifting closed. "They did," Tobias agreed, holding her close. "They truly did." The years continued their march. Thomas married a schoolteacher from Santa Fe, a woman as independent and intelligent as his mother, and they settled near Agua Caliente to help manage the boarding houses. They gave Emma and Tobias 3 grandchildren who ran wild through the very halls where their grandmother had once worked. Sarah never married, choosing instead to dedicate herself to journalism and activism. She moved to Denver to work for a major newspaper, but she returned often to Agua Caliente and spent her summers in the mountain cabin, writing articles that challenged and inspired readers across the West. The boarding houses expanded again, becoming a small hotel empire that employed dozens of people from Agua Caliente and the surrounding area. Emma's business acumen became legendary, and women from across the territory sought her advice and mentorship. She helped dozens of women start their own businesses, offering not just advice, but also financial backing and moral support. Tobias remained her steady partner through it all. He never lost his love for the mountains, but he had found something he loved even more in Emma and the life they had built. He was respected in town as a man of integrity and strength, someone who could be counted on to help a neighbor or stand up for what was right. When the women of New Mexico Territory finally gained the right to vote in territorial elections in 1911, Emma was 72 years old and one of the first in line to cast her ballot. Tobias stood beside her, his chest swelling with pride as she marked her choices and deposited her ballot in the box. "We did it," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "We lived to see this day." "You did it," he corrected. "You and women like you who refused to accept that stubborn was a flaw instead of a strength." They celebrated that night with their children and grandchildren. 4 generations gathered around the table at the original boarding house that had started it all. Emma looked around at the faces she loved, at the life that had bloomed from one brave choice to be herself, and she felt a profound gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Tobias asked, covering her hand with his. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive. I am thinking that every difficult moment, every time someone said I was too stubborn or too independent or too much, it was all worth it, because it led me to you and to this life and to all of this. We are all lucky," Thomas said, raising his glass. "To our parents, who showed us what true partnership looks like, who taught us that love means supporting each other's dreams, not sacrificing them." Everyone raised their glasses, and Emma felt the love of her family wash over her like a benediction. She and Tobias had one last trip to the mountain cabin in the summer of 1913. They were both in their 70s now, moving slower but still vital, still deeply connected. Thomas drove them up in his automobile, a modern convenience that seemed strange in the wilderness, but got them there faster than the old horse trail ever had. The cabin looked the same as it always had, weathered but solid, surrounded by wildflowers and pine trees. They spent 2 weeks there, moving through the rhythms they had established over decades. Morning coffee on the porch, days spent reading and talking and simply being together, evenings watching the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed their love story. "I am not ready to say goodbye to this place," Emma said on their last evening there. "I know we are getting old, and next summer we might not be able to make the trip, but this place is part of my soul now. Then we will come back as long as we are able," Tobias said. "And when we cannot come back anymore, we will remember. We will close our eyes and we will see these mountains and feel this peace, and it will still be ours." "Promise me something," Emma said, taking his hand. "Anything. Promise me that when I die, you will scatter some of my ashes here. This place deserves to hold part of me, the way it has held so much of our love. Only if you promise to do the same for me." "I promise." They sat in silence, holding hands as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. The wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled. It was a sound of wildness and freedom, a sound that had defined so much of their life together. Katherine Carson lived to be 79 years old. She died peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1920, surrounded by family, her hand clasped in Tobias's. Her obituary, written by Sarah, filled the entire front page of the newspaper and was reprinted in papers across the state. It spoke of her business acumen, her writing talent, her activism, and her unwavering belief in equality and justice. But mostly it spoke of her courage to be herself in a world that demanded conformity. Tobias scattered half her ashes in the mountains she had loved, at the cabin they had built together. The other half were buried in the Agua Caliente cemetery, where a headstone bore the inscription she had chosen herself. She knew her own mind well. Tobias lived another 5 years without her, years that were difficult but not empty. He was sustained by his children and grandchildren, by the memories of the life they had built, and by the knowledge that he had loved and been loved by an extraordinary woman. He spent his final summer in the mountain cabin, with Thomas and Sarah taking turns staying with him. When he died in the spring of 1925, at the age of 83, his children honored his wishes and scattered his ashes alongside Emma's in the mountains. They stood together on the porch of the cabin, all the children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, and they told stories about the stubborn girl and the mountain man who had loved each other so well. They had something special, Sarah said to her nieces and nephews. They had a partnership built on respect and equality and deep, abiding love. That is what we should all aspire to. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations. The boarding houses, now a proper hotel, continued to operate under family management. Emma's articles were collected and published in a book that became required reading in women's studies courses. The story of her life, and her life with Tobias, became the kind of legend that inspired others to be brave enough to chart their own course. And in Agua Caliente, which had grown from a small territorial town into a thriving city, there was a historical marker outside what had once been the Katherine House boarding house. It told the story of Katherine and Tobias Carson, of how they had built a life and a business and a love that had lasted until death and beyond. The inscription ended with words that captured the essence of their story. In an era when women were expected to conform, she dared to be herself. In a time when men sought to control, he chose to support. Together, they proved that true love does not diminish but magnifies, does not confine but liberates. They showed a community and a territory that stubborn could be another word for strong, and that partnership could mean equality. Tourists would stop and read the marker, and some would be moved to learn more about this couple who had defied convention. They would read Emma's articles and marvel at her insight and courage. They would read accounts of Tobias's life and admire his willingness to step outside the rigid gender roles of his time. But the real legacy of Emma and Tobias was not in historical markers or published collections. It was in the way their descendants approached their own relationships, seeking partnership over domination, respect over control. It was in the women who read Emma's story and found the courage to start their own businesses or fight for their own rights. It was in the men who learned from Tobias's example that supporting a strong woman did not diminish their own strength, but enhanced it. And it was in that mountain cabin, still standing more than a century after Tobias built it, where couples would sometimes come to renew their vows or simply to reconnect. They would sit on the porch as Emma and Tobias once had, looking out at the eternal mountains, and they would feel the echo of a great love that had blessed that place. The story of the stubborn girl and the mountain man lived on, not as a fairy tale, but as a testament to what love could be when two people saw each other clearly, accepted each other fully, and built a life together as true equals. They had found each other in an unlikely place at an unlikely time, and they had created something beautiful that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. In the end, perhaps that was the greatest legacy of all, the proof that love, real love, the kind that honors and elevates both partners, could survive any obstacle and transcend any boundary. Emma and Tobias had lived that truth, and in doing so, they had lit a light for all who came after them, showing the way toward a kind of partnership that was still, even generations later, something to aspire to and celebrate. Their story ended as all stories must, but their love continued in the hearts and lives of those who remembered them, who were inspired by them, who learned from their example. And in the mountains above Agua Caliente, in a cabin built by hand and love, the wind still whispered through the pines, carrying with it the echo of two voices promising to love and honor each other, not just until death, but beyond it, into whatever eternity might hold.